I think we stopped at verse 9 last week in the book of Esther. In this first chapter, we find that we talked last week about a party that has been thrown. Is that right? We talked about the king. At that time, he's the king over the largest empire of that day. And he is at one of their mansions, one of we would call it mansions. He's at one of their palaces. They have several provinces. This is a vast empire, and he's celebrating. And he's called all his princes together to celebrate with him. They've spent 6 months planning, and they're taking time after the planning is over. They're planning to invade Greece, and now they're going to celebrate. They've come together with a plan that they feel comfortable with, and this is a celebration that takes 7 days. Now, in this celebration, what we find that's not particularly common in that day is that the wives or the women were celebrating in another area of the palace, and the queen was hosting the women, where the men are celebrating here in a different area, and the king is hosting it. Now, there are some things that we have to understand about the culture. The wives were in one area because the king and his men at that time, it would be safe to assume that he had women there as entertainment. It would be safe to assume that. However, we don't know for sure. Many of the scholars are assuming that there is entertainment there before the men. So what we find is that they are celebrating. They're happy. They're joyful. They're getting drunk, and now the king is called for his queen. So when we look here in verses 10 through 22 tonight, and we will finish these verses, let's look at the first 3 verses 10 through 12. The Bible says, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Sarkis, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of the king Xerxes to bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing her royal crown in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. we get... It would seem that way, wouldn't it? It would seem that way. She'd be one of these local girls from around here. Here the king is sent for his wife, the queen. He wants to show her off, and she says, no, I'm not going. Let me get this. Now, does this seem reasonable to us? I mean, just nowadays it does. Back then it doesn't. Now there's some things going on, and I think it'll help us to really make sense of this. So what we first want to notice, if I get this, the king's request. Okay, the king's request, he wanted to put his wife's beauty on display. Some writers would have us to believe that in that day when the king had this party, that it not only did it last for several days, but he likely had women, particularly the most attractive slave women in the palace, dance around in front of the men. It would seem that this is something that just took place. And so because they're drunk at this point, here's 7 days of drinking and carousing and just having a good time. Now they're not just drunk. They're good and drunk. they're wasted. They wake up in the morning and they start partying, and it goes all day and all night for 7 days. So here the king wanted to put his wife on display before these men. Now this sounds pretty good at first glance. It sounds like, well, the king wants to show off his wife. And when we think about that, it doesn't cause a whole lot of alarm unless we really read into what's taking place. Now, what problem would you suppose this would bring? Why would it be such a problem for the king to send after his queen to come and show her off in front of these men? Exactly. Is that typically how a woman would feel, especially if she's not drunk? Yeah. You know, the most miserable place for a sober person to be is amongst a bunch of drunks. Yeah. Now this is on YouTube and Facebook tonight and tomorrow, so I know people are going to hear that.
King hadn't been drunk and never did it.
Exactly. He sure wouldn't have. He wouldn't have done it. Here, this king, him and his guests, they were drunk. Their inhibitions were lowered, and because of this, it would be safe to say that they were filled with lust. Here's these men drunk. They've probably watched women dance around in front of them, and they're filled with lust. And the king is saying, go get my wife. Go get the queen. But there's more. There's more to it. It goes a little further. When we look in this passage, we begin to see the king's pride. The king wanted to go get her for a particular reason, didn't he? He says, bring Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. In other words, if the king's guests were filled with lust, why would he want to put his wife on display? This verse explains that. If the king knows these men are drunk, they're filled with lust, why would I want to put my wife on display? Well, he wanted to dance his wife around in front of them so these men could see the beauty that the king is with day in and day out. The beauty that he has that sleeps with him at night. The beauty that he has that's holding on to his arm. We've all heard of trophy wives. That wealthy men will marry a young, beautiful woman just to have her on his arm so that other people will see this. Here, basically, he's wanting to put her out on display so the other men would envy him. They would see what he has. Now, we've got to understand this has got to be filling his mind. He's got to be filled with pride here and wanting people to envy him. He's thrown this lavish party for 7 days in his palace to entertain his highest ranking officials. He's wanting to look good in front of them. He's wanting them to say, well, you know, this is our king. This is a great man. Look at what he's done for us. This man needs to be lifted high because look at what he's given us. And now he's wanting to put his wife out there so they could say, look at the beauty that hangs on to our king. Look how beautiful our queen is. He was just filled with pride so much that he wanted his guests to gaze upon her, seeing all the appealing beauty that she had, so that they would envy him. Now, we see the order. I want us to notice the order here. The order is that the king has ordered his eunuchs to go bring Queen Vashti to the feast. Bring her away from her party and bring her to their party. Now the eunuchs we need to understand they were placed in charge of the king's wives and their concubines because they would be no threat to the king. There'd be no threat of them having a sexual relationship with the wife or the concubine. No matter how good looking of men these were, they were eunuchs. So there was no threat to the king. And no matter how much the king had rejected his wife, no matter how much he had pushed her aside, he didn't have to worry about these men showing his wife a lot of affection. So here are these 7 eunuchs. They were sent to. Now here's something that's interesting. He names these eunuchs. He names them. I'm wondering why. Why would he name them? Any ideas? I'm wondering why it would take 7 men to go fetch one woman. Unless she is a lumpy woman. Why would it take to protect her? To make sure she's prepared, maybe? To make sure that she's presenting herself to the king in a proper way? It doesn't say exactly why he names these eunuchs, but he does. He goes through the trouble of naming them. So there is something significant here. And maybe it's something that we need to really search, but there's something significant in why he names them. I wasn't able to find it. So we see his order. His order is for them to go and receive and to bring his wife in. But he also gives some instruction. His instruction was that she was to wear her royal crown. He didn't just want them to see her beauty. He wanted them to see what he had given her. He wanted them to see the beauty that he had placed upon her head. Everything that he treasured was coming before him, and he wanted others to gaze upon it. He was just so filled with pride. But what we also see is the queen's refusal. There in verse 12, but Queen Vashti refused to come to the king's command. Now,
Let me interject this, Pastor.
go ahead.
David Jeremiah said the law prohibited anyone from looking at the face of royal women. And she knew that. She knew those guys were drunk.
She knew they were drunk.
She knew she wasn't supposed to go in and expose herself to a bunch of men because she was royal.
Yep. She was of royalty. Now, it seems at this point, her husband has forgotten that. Apparently, he was drunk. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. He's king. Exactly. It really is. Because he is king, he is drunk. Now, with what Brother Roger just shared, that the queen knew she was royalty. She knew, understood that she wasn't to present herself in front of these men, but the king's asking her to. Who is she protecting? Well, you could look at it that way. More so, it seems she's protecting the king, because she's a reflection of him. And if she comes before these men willingly, knowing they're drunk, it says something about her. And it says something about the king. So now she's saying, I'm not going to go. Well, the problem is the king's drunk. Now, with her refusal, what we see is in that day, just think about in that day, would you think she had the right to refuse him? She had no rights. No rights at all. So Brother Rogers told us with her having no rights, why she actually would refuse the king. which would actually, or it should be seen as a benefit to the king. But knowing the consequences, would there be consequences? Would you think she knew that there's going to be consequences for me not going? Would you think she knew that? That
She knew she weren't supposed to refuse the king or anything.
so if she knew that and she did it anyway, she knew there were consequences. Thing is, sometimes the consequences to your actions is worthy to take if your actions are the right actions. If you're doing what's right, then it's right to take those consequences. If you're doing what's wrong, well, you're going to regret that you've done what's wrong because of the consequences that comes with it. When I was in elementary school, I had a teacher in the 6th grade. I had her for 5th and 6th grade English. And she would tell us boys, she had told us as students, she said, listen guys, don't ever get caught starting trouble with someone else. But defend yourself and take the consequences. Because there's going to be consequences if you stand there and let them beat on you. Just defend yourself and then take the consequences. Sometimes we have to do the right thing and face the consequences. And she was willing to do this. When she knew that there were going to be consequences. But she also knew she didn't want to stand around with men gazing upon her, lusting after her. And for this she refused, defying the command. Now upon receiving the news of this defiance, King Xerxes at once became furious. And the Bible says he burned with anger. Now, here's the thing with this. There's something about being drunk. There's something about alcohol that it does to people. We can be in a crowded room. You can be at a convention, in a coliseum. You can be at a ball game. You can be wherever it is just crowded. You can be in church. Somebody brush you across your shoulder and arm. You're not going to think twice about it. It's crowded. Or if you do turn, they're going to turn, and usually they're going to apologize. You're going to walk on. Is that not right? But when you're drunk, somebody can be pushed into you, and you take offense over that, and trouble seems to want to start. It is. When we're drunk, we get mad over stuff we got no business getting mad over. When alcohol is involved, we can get angry and upset over stuff that just doesn't make sense. Now in these verses, hear what the king's wanting, what he's asked. Is he mistreating his wife? In your mind, would you say he's mistreating her? You'd say he is? Would you call his request to her evil? To have her parade around in front of drunken men, would you call that as being evil?
It's not evil.
You don't think?
He's asking her to do something against what she wanted to do.
Oh, yeah, we do a lot of ignorant things, yeah. I would want to say it's evil because if my daughter is married to a man and he wants her to do that and he's in a drunken state, he's not only disrespected her, he's disrespected me, and he's disrespected God if she's a Christian. And if he's disrespected God, it can become evil. It can be considered evil. Anything that goes against God is evil. There's nothing minor that we can say, well, that's not pleasing to God, but it's not evil. If it's not pleasing to God, it is evil. If it's against what God says for to do, it's evil. Sin is evil. That tells me gossip is evil, doesn't it? Backbiting is evil. The Bible says it kills a man. But as we go further, would you call it demeaning and degrading? Yes, you'd call it demeaning and degrading. I can't imagine why a man would want to parade his wife around in front of other men just so they could lust after her, but he does. And this is a result of drunkenness.
It's just not drunkenness, though. I think he just drunk on power.
But,
His authority. You have people today the same way. They're drunk with their authority. And I think his authority mixed with the wine.
yeah, his authority, his pride,
Pride.
his ego, all of this mixed with the alcohol, it really, it resulted in him not only demeaning his wife, but degrading her also. So drunkenness can cause a person to lose control of their reason and behavior. Brother Roger said it earlier. It'll cause you to do something you ordinarily would not do. There are girls pregnant today because they were drinking the night before. Guys who become fathers because they were drinking the night of. Well, it would seem that way, wouldn't it? But truth is, alcohol will cause you to treat someone whom you love like you don't love them. And this is what seems to be taking place. Because of alcohol, there are a lot of things that result from it. Spouses and children are abused due to alcoholism. Where ordinarily, some of you may know men, where it was as good as gold when you were talking with them. Working with them on the job, you couldn't find someone better. But when they went home and started drinking, they were a monster to their wife and their children.
I used to work with a guy like that. He's as good a guy as you want to see. Work with him, good as you want to be with, let him get a drink. Like totally different, like night and day.
Yeah, that fire water,
You couldn't look at him because you were talking about it.
yeah, yes,
Drink 3 or 4 beers and change.
yeah, change. So wives and children are abused, marriages are shattered, sexual assault takes place, where girls are saying no and they just refuse to hear. Or their wives. Do you believe wives can be sexually assaulted by their husbands? And 9 times out of 10, when that takes place, alcohol or drugs is involved. All sorts of sexual immorality, careers, jobs, they're lost. Diseased organs can become a result of alcoholism. Drunkenness can lead to drinking and driving, which can also lead to the possibility of accidentally killing somebody. All of these things we see can be a direct cause of alcoholism. Matter of fact, Luke's gospel tells us in Luke 21:34, but take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and the cares of this world, and that day come upon you unexpectedly. That day, in my Bible, it's day is capitalized. It's saying here, take heed to yourselves. Do not be weighed down with partying and drinking. Do not be weighed down by the cares of this world, because we don't know what day Jesus is coming. He can come at any time. And it would be a sad thing, wouldn't it, for a born-again Christian to be drunk off his mind one moment, and the very next moment he's standing in front of God. I'd hate for that to be me. Ephesians 5:18 says, do not be drunk with wine, in which dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. Proverbs 20:1 says, wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. Isaiah 5:11, it tells us, woe to those who drink early in the morning, that they may fall intoxicated in drink, who continue until night, till wine inflames them. This is what seemed to actually take place. They woke up early in the morning, began to drink, and by night, that drink inflamed them. Now, what does the Bible say about drinking? Obviously, it was a common thing in that day. Here we're talking about drunkenness. That's what the scripture is speaking of, drunkenness. Now, you can't get drunk unless you drink one. Then that one becomes two, and two becomes more. The easiest way to never be drunk is to never drink. And to think that we can control it, if we're not careful, it'll control us. And it'll come out of nowhere. Now, truthfully, I know some doctors suggest that a cup of wine, a small glass of wine, 2 to 4 ounces for your stomach. And maybe there's some health benefits to where it's better than a pill. But if you have a family history of this being an issue, it's better not to trust it. Take the pill. Take the pill. I would never suggest anyone to socially drink. I don't socially drink. So I would never do it. I would never suggest anyone to do it. The Bible doesn't encourage it. And there are those who want to make the Bible encourage their own behavior, but it doesn't encourage it. So when we make decisions, we need to understand that decisions that we make have consequences. Here, the king, he became furious. Let's look at verse 13. I'll go ahead and read 13 through. We'll read 13 through, at least through 17. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice, those closest to him being Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan. That's as good as I can get. The 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom. What shall we do to Queen Vashti according to the law, because she did not obey the command of the king Ahasuerus brought to her by the eunuchs? And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces and the king Xerxes. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report. King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. This every day the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of this behavior of the queen. Thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Xerxes, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. When the king's decree which he will make is proclaimed throughout all the empire, for it is great, all the wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own script, to every people in their own language, that each man should be master of his own house and speak in the language of his own people. So, the king is upset. Was there an added problem to the fact that she defied the king?
One of the worst things you can do is do something like this and you're upset.
Yes.
Out of the city, and we're upset. It comes back to hold us.
Yes. You're right. Here the king is making a rash decision. He's making a decision under the influence of alcohol and anger. And because he's making this decision, there's some other things are taking place. Now, if we look at the whole story, this somehow has to take place. Because if we're thinking of the whole story of Esther, the Jews have to be saved. So something like this is got to take place. Somehow Esther has to become queen. Exactly.
There is people, and you, if it did, well, there was a bad thing to happen. He moved Vashti to Esther, he will become queen. She can protect her people.
Well, and you're exactly right. Vashti had to be removed for Esther to become queen. However, God knew the man that Xerxes was, and he knew the decisions he would make. He knew how he would treat Vashti, and because he knew this, we could see God's hand in moving Esther before the king. So here there was some added problem. The queen didn't just defy the king. If we look there in verse 16, she did much more than defy the king. She defied him, and she defied him in public. But there in verse 16, Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but but also all the princes. Yeah. Here he's telling, listen, she has done this not just in front of the king, but also in front of us. Y'all remember where their wives were at? With Vashti. So you would think they're there when Vashti says, no, I'm not going. All of them will probably put their hands over their mouths. Their mouths have probably got large. And some are just sitting back saying, now if she can tell the king no, maybe I can tell my man no. If she gets away with this, well, I got ammunition to where if my husband says something to me, the king didn't do nothing to the queen. All of this is into play here. The defiance was done public, and it was done before these high-ranking officials. So, now I've jumped a little ahead of myself. Let me back up a little bit. Yeah, I've jumped ahead of myself. The king was furious. Now, he was furious at this proposal of the queen. He sought counsel of the men closest to him. Now, what was he really seeking? When he was sought counsel of these men, what was he seeking? Was he seeking reconciliation with his wife? Was he seeking a way to win her over, to get her to come in there where he was at? He was seeking revenge. That's all that was on his heart. He just wanted her to obey him. Once the advisors met, they agreed that the king should charge Vashti with insubordination. This was a serious offense. She defied the king's direct order. In verse 15 we see that she defied a direct order. The queen had embarrassed the king before his guests. And to be honest, to embarrass the king was a greater defense than her disobedience. Because the disobedience was public, he was standing there twiddling his thumbs looking like a clown. He ordered his wife to come, and she said, no, I ain't coming. And before all of these men, these highest ranking officials in the land, it seemed like, now what would be said if it was in church? Exactly. If it's the pastor and you see his wife openly disregarding anything that he said in church, how can he run the church if he can't run his own home? He can't, can he? Can you imagine this going through the thoughts of these men? Wait a minute. We've been praising this man. We've been praising him for all that he has and all that he's done for us, and he can't even control his own home. Exactly. These men, they had it for themselves. They were thinking, something's wrong here. We better fix it. So he calls those men together. As he calls them together, the added problem is that she didn't just defy him, but she also defied the princes. Her defiance was done public before these high-ranking officials. And if the queen was allowed, if she was allowed to defy the king's order, then the other wives or other women might feel they can do the same thing toward their husbands. In the minds of these men, as they are meeting and thinking, how are we going to fix this? Something had to be done, and it had to send a message. The queen had to be punished severely enough that it rang out loud and clear to every woman in the province. You know what these men were afraid of? Their wives were going to defy them. That's all they were afraid of. Well, alcohol has a way of making you think differently, doesn't it? Here, the king's word was law, and it was his bond. The bond of his word being law is what held the nation together. And here they were afraid that the nation was going to fall apart. And for that reason, his word had to be upheld. Whatever he said had to be done. And if his wife weren't going to do it, surely no one else would do it. So let's put something in place that would force the wife to have to. That was their intention. Well, out of fear that disrespect and contempt would continue by the women toward men, this royal decree should be issued. Queen Vashti should be dethroned, and she should be banished from the kingdom. The king should choose another queen who's more worthy. And if we go back to what Brother Roger said earlier, that she didn't come before the king and these men while they were drunk, because her being royalty, that would not have been proper. It would not have been right. So she done the right thing. She proved to be a worthy queen, and now they're saying she's not worthy, simply because she disobeyed the king. I wish leaders would do that in the country. Here, this woman done it, but the leader of the country wouldn't do it. The leader of the country. We remember when Jesus was brought before Pilate, his wife told him, leave that man alone. Leave that man alone. But because of what the people wanted, he offered Jesus up. Again, the providence of God. It had to be done. Jesus had to die for our sin, or we would be lost today. But we see what's taking place today, whether Republican or Democrat or independent, whoever's running for a position, if it's an elected position, locally, nationally, or globally, if it's an elected position, anyone who holds that position full term is compromised in some way or another for what the people they represent want, rather than what's necessarily right. That's the truth. There are things that the people that get off the school board the earliest, the people that leave the tribal council earliest, the people who leave any government job or any board of directors are the people who refuse to compromise their principles. Because if they stay there very long, they're going to make so many enemies that they're going to feel that pressured to have to compromise them. You know, politics goes much larger than what we see on television. It's much larger than that. It's a bigger scope than we'll ever understand. And our governors and our senators and our representatives, they play the game. It's corrupt. Listen, the greatest enemy in the country today, in the United States, it's not someone of a different race. It's not someone coming into the country, but it's the political machine of the country. That is the greatest evil in this country. It's the political machine. And it's playing out right before us. No, not in this life. It won't be fixed. The king should choose another queen, more worthy than she, when she proved herself to be worthy. Now, listen to the advice that's placed on, this advice, it pleased the king. So he issued a decree dethroning Queen Vashti. She was banished from his presence forever. And furthermore, every man, did y'all notice that? Every man should be master in his own house and speak in the language of his own people. They put that in law, that every man should be master of his own house. They were that afraid that there'd be a revolt by the women. They were that afraid that these women would take what Queen Vashti had done and do it themselves. Once this decree had been proclaimed throughout the nation, women would know that they must honor and respect their husbands. Moreover, everyone would know that they must obey the orders of the king. So, in a drunken state, what we see is that the King Xerxes, he actually abused his wife. In a drunken state, he showed her no respect. He showed no honor for her whatsoever. In a drunken state, he showed no regard for how she would feel being paraded around in front of the king's drunk friends. To him, in this drunken state, his wife existed clearly and only for pleasure. It wasn't about love in this state. In the state he was in, love had nothing to do with things. Because she was his wife, she was to do anything that he wished or that he asked her to do. And she had no right to question it. Now, we understand that was pretty much the culture of that day. But if he loved her, then he wouldn't have treated her the way that he did. In a drunken state, it's hard to see love. It's hard to see love when you're drunk. Just as King Xerxes abused his wife, many women are abused in the same way today. Women are still treated like possessions or objects of beauty. Our society stresses that women's sexual appeal is more important than their character, their knowledge, or their abilities. In this world, we see where movies, magazines, television, beauty books, beauty contests, swimsuit issues of sport magazines. We see all the promotional ads on television and everywhere else that in order for a woman to be who she should be in this world, then she must be desirable and satisfying and worthwhile to the eye of the man. That's the message the world is sending today. And as a result of this, relationships suffer. Many young women grow up thinking that looks matter more than their character. more than their knowledge and ability. And I want to tell you, it doesn't. It doesn't. Beauty fades in the eyes of some people, but if you truly love someone, you see them for the beauty that they are. Make sure that's why when people ask you, Brother Ronald, why is she with you? Tell yeah. Many young men grow up thinking that women are no more than sex objects. Society sends the message that women's value lies in their beauty or their attractiveness rather than the quality of who she really is. But the Bible tells us something different than society. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 12:4, an excellent wife, or in King James, a virtuous wife, is to be the crown of her husband. Proverbs 31:30 says, charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Ephesians 5:25 says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave his life, or gave himself for her. Every man who has a wife should be willing to give up his own life for her. The women here, do you feel like it's a chauvinist world that we're living in, actually? Because the beauty is placed on the wife. It's not placed on the man. You watch video. I watched a video recently, and Facebook shows all sorts of videos. And there was this question, and it went around beaches. You'd see women in swimsuits, bikinis, and different settings, and they're asking them, would you rather a husband with a bodybuilder's body, or a fit body, or a dad body? A dad bod or a fit bod? I guess dads can't be fit. so at most, I'm saying most, around 85% prefer dad bods. What that tells me is that men are being fed something through society as to how women should look. And women aren't allowing themselves to be fed that same thing about men. Here's the truth. I think every woman should do what she can to remain healthy. Healthy. So if that means maybe not splurging on an extra dessert. If it means just going to the doctor regularly. Weight should never be the primary thing on a woman's mind. Her size should never be the primary thing on her mind. Her health should be. If she is healthy, and health comes in all sizes, then that should be what matters. If it's important to her that she look a certain way, then by all means, go for it. But not do it just to please someone else. I understand there's some women and men who are doing it, who are out of vainness, who are having elective surgeries. If that's the reason, if it's out of vainness, I think we need to really be careful with going under a knife electively. If you're doing it for health reasons, then that's something different. It's different altogether. And I think there are some surgical procedures that some people feel they have to do in order to be healthy, in order to live longer. Then hey, knock yourself out. But that, to me, that's no different than someone taking surgery for cancer. My diabetes is so far gone that I'm morbidly obese, and it can be fixed with this surgery. Then if you're okay with the surgery, then take the surgery. But But I don't think anyone should be made to feel like you're less than because you look different than someone in a magazine or someone on a television commercial. The average lifespan of a professional athlete, 2 to 6 years. The average lifespan of a model, 2 to 6 years. That's about it. 6 years they're forgotten because there's someone younger who's come along. Not someone prettier, but someone younger. So here, the king in his drunkenness displayed what the world, the society that we're living in, often displays. Folks, if we can really see people for who they are and see one another for who they really are, oh, it'll be a much better world to live in. A much better world. Beauty comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Some of the prettiest girls I was in school with in college, and you couldn't have a conversation with them. Oh man, you're exactly right. Man, some girls, you'd look at their boyfriends and say, "What in the world?" And then after a while, you get to know them a little bit, and you're like, "I'm glad he's got her." And same with guys. I think women have really evolved on this a lot better than we have as men, to where they look at the person rather than the looks of the person much more. My wife's evidence of it, man. She looks a lot better than I do. She gets a lot more compliments than I do in the run of a year. And so if either one of us settled, she's the one that settled. That's the way I look at it. But I believe the longer you stay with someone and the longer you really, truly love someone, that's the way you'll see it. When a husband thinks that he's settled, he's not looking at his wife the right way. Vice versa. If she thinks she's settled, she's not looking at him the right way. I think God, it's meant for us to be the family, the couple that God would have us to be. We've got to look at each other and say, I thank God that he put me with you. And when we do, we'll see more marriages survive.